Welcome to You've Got This with Sarah Hamaker, a podcast to encourage and equip moms along their parenting journey. Join Sarah each week as she interviews dads and moms like you and discusses the joys, challenges, and rewards of raising kids.
Hi, and welcome to this week's You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hamaker, and today I have with me Dr. Scott Turansky. He's the co-founder of the National Center for Biblical Parenting. And full disclosure here, I train with Scott to be a biblical parenting coach, and I love his program. He has a lot of great stuff, so check that out too. Welcome, Scott. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be with you, and I'm really grateful for the partnership that we have together in helping parents. There are just so many needs today, so thanks for the privilege of working with you and talking to you.
Yeah, thanks. And one of the things that Scott and I have talked about, and that is a part of his ministry as well, is helping parents with kids who are angry. Now, most of you, my listeners, know I have 4 children, and I know one of my children in particular has struggled with this. And it seems like I work with a lot of parents who have one child who struggles with anger. And I know, Scott, that you've worked with many, many parents over the years that have kids who struggle with anger. Why is anger so, why do we see this in a lot of families?
Well, first of all, I also saw this in my own children growing up, so I have personal experience in my own home. But you're right, I've counseled with hundreds and hundreds of families and tried to offer solutions. And I see that the anger that children have comes from a lot of different sources. But as you know, we have a heart-based approach. So I'm going to describe it in terms of the heart. God has given everyone a heart, and that heart contains several things. And when those things are a little bit off or not managed well, then we have this eruption that comes out. So when I'm working with children, elementary age children, for example, I may say to them, you might think over here at point A, those are the things that cause the anger eruption that you're having. What are some things that prompt you to feel angry? And so kids will tell me these things that are causes, and I say, all right, that's point A. Over here was your cause, and then there's this reaction, but it's what's in the middle that counts. This middle is the heart. And inside the heart, we have a lot of different things. For example, the Bible tells us that desires are in the heart. When it says, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart, that just tells us where those desires exist. They're in the heart of a person. We also know that emotions are in the heart of a person. So, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Or Jesus tells his disciples, don't let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. We know that these emotions exist in the heart. Now, I would say that many times children invest their emotions into their desires, and when those desires or expectations are not met, then their emotions react. They become overwhelmed with emotion, and they don't know what to do. The other issue, just as we're talking about this, has to do with beliefs. Some children believe the wrong things, or they believe things that are wrong about life, like chores or mom's work that she's trying to delegate to me, or if I'm in the middle of a level of my video game, then I have the right to complete that before I listen to what my mom is telling me to do. So those beliefs often need to be adjusted. All of that is hard work. So I think the key thing here is to recognize that children are all different. They're all unique, and they all have different levels of emotional sensitivity. But we can do a lot of work to help them make changes because we understand the heart, and then ways that we can bring about change in children using that heart-based approach.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really love about the program that I went through with you to get trained is to help parents realize that the emotion like heart, like the anger or joy or sadness is really kind of giving us a glimpse of what's going on in a child's heart. And when you think about that, why kids get angry, and I always encourage parents to think a little bit about that so that they can recognize that it does get down to that selfish desire that is in our hearts. And sometimes when we realize that we can look at a child and go, oh, well, you're showing me exactly what's in your heart right now, and that's a good thing because now I can help point you to that to show you how to change your heart.
Yes. So I would agree that it's like, every once in a while you watch a detective show and they're trying to solve the murder or mystery or whatever it is, and they say, follow the money. If you follow the money, you'll find the person who's guilty of the crime. Well, when we're working with the heart, we can often follow the emotion. If we follow the emotion, it's often an indicator of something that's going on inside the heart. Sometimes it's blatant selfishness. Sometimes it's a misguided belief. Sometimes it's just a strong desire for something that isn't even sinful or wrong. It's just that the child doesn't know when to let it go, and that letting it go takes skill. It's not something that comes naturally to some kids, and so they're leader types. They're strong-willed, or they have a passion for something, or they know where they're going, and so to try to redirect them can elicit this angry response inside of the heart. So yeah, we need to work on that and help children to address it.
And I think that so many times when we have a child or we have a child who's exploding in anger, it can be very scary for a parent to see their child out of control or to see how much anger has taken hold. Do you have any advice or ways that we can kind of maybe look at that anger or help our child through that anger?
Well, certainly, I do think one response that parents have can be the fear and anxiety experience themselves. But I think a lot of times parents themselves get angry when their kids get angry. So There's that whole anger episode that parents are having. So now you've got two angry people, a kid and a parent, and that just really complicates the whole situation. So
doesn't it kind of feed off each other? That I notice when I get angry in response to a child's anger, it just escalates it all.
I agree. And I do think that if parents can learn to use firmness, for example, without harshness, in other words, they don't have to raise their voice, but they can draw a very clear line that we're not going to do it this way, or this is what we are going to do. When parents reduce their emotional intensity, kids often, not always, but can respond better. The kids ride the emotional waves of parental intensity, so we have to be careful as we're trying to teach our children how to respond better to their challenges.
Now, one of the things that I learned in my training with you and your program was about cues, the anger cues. And I found this to be so valuable in helping myself, because we all need help with anger sometimes, and helping my children to recognize what's happening either physically or inside their heart before they explode in anger.
Yes, the cues are important. So if we're working through the 8-week biblical parenting coaching program, when we're working through that program with a family and a parent says, my child's angry, we do not work with anger until week 3 or 4. Or maybe we'll work on it in week 3, but we start with teaching children to give up their agenda, follow instructions, develop a sense of obligation, because that starts the heart to move in the right direction. So when it comes to actually bringing about change in a child, I usually recommend to parents, don't start with the anger. It's a symptom of something going on. But if we get working down the program a little bit and we still got these anger episodes, then yes, we go to directly working with anger, and we start by identifying the cues. The cues are the indicators that say, I'm about to lose control. And they're usually biological cues that we can actually see. And I even say to kids, let's not think about you for a minute. Let's think about your mom. How can you tell when your mom's starting to get angry? And so kids will say something like, well, her eyes get big and her neck sticks out. I say, okay, how can you tell when your dad's starting to get angry? Well, he has this vein on the side of his neck that starts bulging. Those are indicators. I say, okay, how can you tell when you're starting to get angry? And we go through a host of different things. It's different for each child. But some children will say, I clench my hands, grit my teeth, my eyes get big or eyes get narrow. A lot of kids start saying, I feel like I'm getting hot, either the heat's coming up through my body or my face is starting to get flushed, something along that line. Those are all the cues that tell me I'm starting to get angry. If I don't do something about this, I'm going to have a problem. So those initial cues can be helpful if we're helping children develop an anger management plan.
Yeah, and I find that it was pretty eye-opening for one of my sons in particular because, as I know some of that we've talked about, your emotions for children can feel so big. They can feel overwhelming, like they can't control them. And when you kind of step back and you go, well, you might think the anger came out of nowhere, but really you were clenching your fist. And one of my sons, he felt like his heart was getting tight inside his chest. And clenching his fists were his anger cues. And I just said, well, when you start to do that, that's when you know the anger's coming. The anger just doesn't, wash over you like a tsunami wave. And kind of, helping them to realize that they can kind of recognize when they're going to have these big emotions, I think can be so important to our kids.
And I think that's why the anger cue step, that first step in developing an anger management plan, is so helpful for children, because some children do feel like they ramp up really quickly, or parents will even say, my child goes from 0 to 60 instantly. And so what we're saying is here, well, there are indicators that this child's frustration is starting to boil, and we want to pick up on those in advance. This is a self-awareness approach that we're trying to use. And the reason we do that is because, as James 1:19 and 20 says, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Well, how can you be slow to get angry if you can't see it coming on? So we're trying to help our children experience those cues, be aware of them, so they can take subsequent action.
Yeah, and it's been very helpful when kids realize, oh, wait a minute, I can recognize this and I can slow the train down. And I've just seen that in my own life and my own kids, and I'm sure you have as well. In general, though, do you think that that we're seeing more anger in kids, less anger in kids? You've been doing this for a while now. Do you find that it's still kind of the same amount? I'm just curious because of our political climate is a little angrier than it used to be, and I'm wondering if that's spilling over into families or if that's always kind of been the same.
Whether it's more now than in the past, I'm not sure. Remember, I deal with a lot of the population that's having problems, so it's a little bit skewed. People come to us for solutions, and therefore they have problems.
Right.
So I don't know. I have seen trends in parenting over the years, things like more dads getting involved in the actual work of parenting and taking an interest in their children. I see parents actually honing down skills and wanting to do that more than in the past, just assuming that their certain approach was the best one. And I think that our whole approach in society, valuing children more, you've got special ed this, and you've got rights of the child here, raises the value level of children more. And because of that, then, parents, I think, are looking for tools that will help their kids thrive, not just kind of get tasks done or get through the day. So there are some trends. Whether anger, it seems reasonable what you're saying, but I can't speak to that, whether we're seeing more anger in children or not.
Yeah, right. And I wasn't quite sure that you could, but I was just curious because it just seems to me that, that people, anger is something like we talked about that kind of can be kind of scary. And I'm glad that we have ways to help parents with kids who are angry. So, as we kind of get close to our time, Scott, do you have any words of encouragement for the family that's really suffering through maybe some anger issues, maybe the parents or the kids, to kind of help them that there is hope, that they can repair those relationships, that they can help each other overcome these anger issues and just have a better relationship with one another? Yeah,
I definitely would suggest to parents that if they understand anger as a heart issue and they start taking actions to help children develop the pathways to get out of their pit, develop the ladder, so the child knows how to respond, and then we use firmness to guide children to some solutions and then just kind of make them happen, then life becomes therapy for children to grow and learn. So I do believe that there are real solutions out there, not only for children, but for parents. And the best solutions are not behavior modification solutions. The best solutions are the heart-based ones that take into account these things that are going on, the wrestling that's happening inside of a child's heart. So we use lots of heart-based tools to do that. And it's not always the same for each child. So it's not like baking cookies. You're looking for the same result each time. What we're doing is we're doing heart work. And so if parents will focus in on the heart of a child and recognize that God changes people at any age, then we can see some real significant work take place in the life of that child. So there's a lot of hope, a lot of encouragement for parents. But they've got to get out of this kind of reactive, he did this, so I react to it. It's got to be something that's strategic, and then we're using some form of a plan, and we're being very intentional about the work we're doing to help children change.
Yeah, and I think that is so important, Scott, because when we don't have a plan, then we're just putting out little fires or big fires all day long, all year long, rather than seeing, well, why the fires keep starting? Well, let's look at how to get ahead of the fire instead of always paying catch up to it. And I know that when parents kind of get, there's short-term and long-term goals, and really focusing on the long-term heart change, which in the short term, things can get really messy. Kids, I always tell parents, kids' behavior when we start working together will get worse before they get better. And that seems a little counterintuitive, but when you're working on the heart, you have to, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And just that encouragement that there is hope, that no child is beyond redemption.
It's so important. And when you see emotion going on in a child and you're trying to bring about change, it's often an indication that you're working in a very sensitive place in that child's heart. Change is hard for any of us, and when emotions are riled in a child, then it's often an indication that you're working in a place that needs some practice, some work, some intentional strategy, because you're touching some emotional nerves. And so we've got to work very carefully but intentionally and not be afraid of those emotions when we're trying to bring about change in children.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to end our talk today. So thank you for being with me, Scott. I appreciate you sharing these great insights. You've been listening to You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hamburger, and my guest today was Dr. Scott Turansky, the co-founder of the National Center of Biblical Parenting. I hope you join me next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast of You've Got This with Sarah Hamburger. Sign up to receive notification of new podcasts and listen to previous editions at sarahhammaker.com. Until next time, remember, parenting might be hard sometimes, but don't worry, you've got this.